Get started. So, hello, a very warm welcome to you all to this new season of Leaf Surgeries. I hope you've all managed to have some downtime over summer, or perhaps you've been as busy as always, which is certainly true of Leaf. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We'll be recording today's session. If you've got any questions, if you could pop those into the chat function, and they'll be fielded a little bit later on by my co-host today, Victoria, who hopefully you can see up on the screen as well. So yeah, just pop any questions into the chat function. Like I say, we've had a really busy summer at Leaf. And yeah, just going to talk about a couple of the things, a couple of the highlights. Groundswell was bigger and better than ever. I hope you all agree who managed to attend. And Leaf hosted some really interesting panels at our stand this year. So it's a bit of a new thing for Leaf, but we're starting to host a few talks and a few panels at our own tent. So if you're there next year, please do look out for those and pop over and see us. This year, among other talks and panels, we had a celebration for the 10-year anniversary of the Jordan Spa Partnership, in which we participate, as do the Wildlife Trusts and, of course, Jordans themselves. And it was just a wonderful celebration of that absolutely industry-leading initiative. We also, a little bit later in the summer, launched our much improved new digital Leaf Sustainable Farming Review. I hope some of you have had a chance to have a look at that. The Leaf Sustainable Farming Review, or as you can imagine, we shorten that to LSFR, is going to be supporting our Leaf Mark certification, and also continuous improvement for farmers and growers that are using it as well. So yeah, if you're interested to hear more, or if you're using it, we'd love to get your feedback on that. And in September, we were delighted, really delighted to launch our first international leaf demonstration farm. Springfield Farm, which is in northern Limpopo, South Africa, launched as a demonstration farm, and it was such an honour to be working with such a brilliant, forward-thinking farm, or producing avocado, macadamia, among other things. And yeah, we're really keen moving forwards to consider how we might have more leaf demonstration farms or similar all around the world. So yeah, watch this space. We'll be doing more of that in the years to come. So that kept us busy among many other things this summer. But back to the UK. Well, we've had a pretty challenging summer in terms of growing conditions. Here in the UK, and as we know, around the world as well. And today we're going to turn our focus very much onto that most vital of resources, vital and limited resources, on our farms and farmland: water. So today's session, we're going to explore thinking about water as that vital resource and limited resource, and how we can manage that. Perhaps delve into some of those proactive steps to address water challenges on farm, different types of water challenge as well, whether that might be too much, too little, quality, availability, and then also how we might access or benefit from support of others in the water industry as well. So, to explore this subject with me today, I am so happy to introduce today's guest, Andrew Court, of Court Farming Partnership Staffordshire, who has been a participant in the Leaf Beacons of Excellence project, where we've really focused on water and trying to understand it a lot more, and a grower that's clearly been at the sharp end of this summer's challenges, and will no doubt have some great strategies to share with us. So Andrew, warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start with a really easy question, which is to invite you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your farming business.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here, and thank you to Leaf for the invitation. The Court Farming Partnership is a partnership between myself and other members of my family, which we started right at the beginning of COVID. As the world was locking down, we were starting a business, which rightly or wrongly we did. The farm itself has been in the family for nearly 100 years, firstly as tenants, and then we've owned it. Right back in the 50s, my grandfather ran it as a completely mixed business with a bit of chickens, a bit of pigs, a bit of sheep, a bit of potatoes, just literally everything. If you could grow it, he got it. And then over the years, as we went into the EEC and efficiency and CAP came along, we really narrowed down to becoming a dairy farm. And then in 2020, when we took over, we looked at the way that farming policy was going, particularly with the government, and sort of what strategies we wanted to take up. And we really shifted into the arable side, but we still wanted to be mixed farmers. So we have beef cattle, which we grow on contract for supermarkets. We've tried a few, but we're currently on a scheme with Marks and Spencers, which is working really well. Um, and that's been a really nice, easy way into the beef industry without a huge outlay for animals. But in terms of our arable, we have quite a diverse crop rotation. So we have winter wheat, followed by winter beans, winter barley, oilseed rape, and then back into winter wheat, or we grow some spring oats. And our target being quite a small farm, we're only 275 acres in all, is that we want to hit really high quality, hitting those really niche markets to maximize our returns. But at the same time, we don't really want to push our crops and push our soils. We want to treat them with respect. So it's a lowish input, a very high quality system is how we're operating at the moment.
Thanks, Andrew. That's brilliant. And also, you touched on there some of the critical things that support how you might manage water or soil, which is that kind of business planning element and knowing exactly what you want to target for your farm. So that's really useful. So brilliant. So let's start with asking, what are the easy wins or the first steps in mitigating things like high rainfall, low rainfall, that farmers can take? Have you got any examples, particularly relevant to your own farm, your own soil types, some of the easy things that you've managed to do?
So I think that if I take you right back to 2020 when we were planning the business, we knew that we were working with quite a light sandy loam, but my family have been very traditional in the past. Always used a plough. They've never used a subsoiler, things like that. So we knew that we needed to look at soil structure. Wheat has traditionally been quite a difficult crop to grow on our farm. The plant would grow and it would look fantastic. You think, oh, I'm going to have a bumper crop of wheat this year. But then, as many people have experienced this summer, it would shrivel up to nothing and be virtually useless. So the farm had only really grown barley and a little bit of maize for the past 20, 30 years. So we knew we really needed to look at drought resistance, drought tolerance. So we did a soil analysis, which we did a full soil analysis, so we understood texture and drainage properties and things like that, and got a real understanding for our soil. So the first point that I'd make is it's good to get a real understanding of the soils that you're working with, and then understand what they're lacking and what you need to build. So we made the switch immediately from the plough to direct drilling. So as you can see behind me, we actually have our Horsch Avatar, which is a direct disc drill. And then we have a bespoke low disturbance subsoiler so that we can promote structure deep down, which is where we're struggling, whilst trying to retain what we've got on the surface in the critical area where the seed will be planted. So building on from soil is looking at, in the arable side, looking at your system, looking at how you establish. That's a really easy win. If we look at the livestock side, we've got a lot of permanent pastures. So again, digging down, understanding the layers of compaction. Again, can we subsoil, or can we introduce other varieties of plants to do that for us? So, for example, we've made the switch to widespread, diverse herbal lays. And whilst they've provided a huge number of benefits in terms of drought tolerance, they've created a structure deep down. So in weather like we've had this summer and in 2022, um, we have been able to, we haven't had as many problems with forage because we've had those deeper rooting plants still having access to water to grow, and then the cattle have been grazing things like plantain rather than grazing grass, which is what we would, in this modern day think about grazing more commonly. So some simple, easy wins just by looking at how we can principally start developing soil structure. And if we develop soil structure, we can develop carbon, which will hold more water. So the higher the carbon content of your soil, the more water you can retain. And some people say, well, you can't develop carbon in sandy soils. Yes, it's a lot harder, but you can do it. And in clay soils, you've got other challenges. You can hold a structure once you've developed it in clay, but creating that structure is very difficult. So different challenges, but there are very simple solutions to those challenges.
I think that's such a great message, to say that no matter what you're working with, there is always something that you can do. And yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear about that, introducing other plants to the rotation as well. I know that at Farm Ed they're doing quite a lot of trials and things like that that you can go and have a look at in terms of, like you say, the plantains and the herbal lays, etc. Um, and yeah, super interesting. Using those kinds of solutions, those nature-based solutions to managing water as well. So thank you very much for that. So um, have you got any interesting approaches to irrigation for your farm? Do you need to use irrigation? And if you do, yeah, what are your approaches?
So we don't need to irrigate. We're not growing those really high value crops, but that's not to say that we don't need to store water as much as we possibly can. So I've talked about those easy wins in developing soil structure and understanding soil structure. There's a lot of other more interesting things that we are looking at, and we're looking at those with Severn Trent. So Severn Trent have been a huge supporter of us in on our farm. So going more down the regenerative principles, we've always got a crop growing on the soil and in the ground to retain that moisture, to retain the soil structure. As I may have said already, soil is a massive sponge, but it's a sponge that can grow and shrink. If you can get that sponge to grow as big as possible, then you effectively have a huge reservoir within your soil. And the bigger it is, the more water you can hold, and the longer that will keep plants going in time of drought. But equally, where in times of rain, the more water that can be stored safely before the land is impassable or you start to get runoff and things like this. So we do have a reservoir. It is our fields. It's not a pond in the middle that we pipe out to the rest of the land.
I love that. I love that framing. So okay, in terms of irrigation, yeah, you can rely on nature to help you with that, and the way that you're planting, um, and the crops that you're choosing and the other plants that you've got. So you've got your reservoirs, but also there's possibly problems. There could be problems, maybe not on your farm, but on others' farms in terms of water logging and too much water. And you touched on drainage earlier, Andrew, and I wondered, have you got any tips or thoughts on, the importance of good land drainage and water drainage on a farm, and have you had to look at doing that on your own farm?
Yes, we've certainly had to improve our drainage on our farm. I'm sure we've all experienced. We're getting a lot more intensive rainfall, short, sharp bursts. Certainly in the last 4 to 6 weeks, we've been having 30 millimeters every 3 days, and then a dry period for 5 days, and then another 30 mil coming very quickly. And that does have an impact on your soil, and it does have an impact on your drainage. So we have very much looked at the farm, looked at where the problematic areas are, predominantly where it's pooling, because if you think about rain falling, each rain droplet can exert roughly around 60 psi of pressure on the soil, on the ground that it hits. So that's more and more commonly creating a very thin layer of compaction on the surface. And the more that that happens and there's nothing to alleviate that, that creates a lot of runoff, which is creating very localized pooling. So we've looked at a strategy where we've been renewing or bringing in drains to drain the very low points within fields and take them into the ditches. But at the same time, we're working to remove that thin layer of compaction. Cover crops is a very good one for holding that open, making sure you have the right plants in the mix, something like oats, which are just there as a holding plant rather than having a specific role within the system. And yeah, that's had a big impact as well.
That's so interesting. Might I ask a question about that in terms of where you're looking at planting other crops as part of the solution? Is there a risk that you don't, do you need to line up an outlet for those? So for your oats, for example, do you need to make sure that you've got a customer for the oats first, or do you do what's right for the soil and then hope the customer will follow?
No, so if it's in the main rotation, which I mentioned previously, they all have an end of use market. The cover crops themselves don't have an end of use market. They are there, much like other machinery that you have in your tool shed, that you have in your shed. It's simply that I'm using a seed drill to go subsoiling and to plant that field and do a job, rather than going through with a subsoiler at 25, £30 an acre. It gets to comparable costs, and it's a good way from an accountancy point of view. If you've got a machine that's lying around like the seed drill, if you can go in and plant that crop, you are your cover crop, you are spreading your annual depreciation over effectively double the area, so your drilling costs come down, and that makes it much more comparable to, or cheaper to, running the subsoiler through the ground. So in some respects, it's an accounting exercise as well. Um, but there is no end of use. We have had a lot of support from Severn Trent. We are in what's called a groundwater catchment zone, so they have a local borehole, and they want to prevent nitrate leaching and other nutrient leaching getting into that borehole, because for every pound roughly that they spend on the farmer preventing that nutrient getting into the water, that saves them 7, 8, £9 on treatment, because it has to go through a chlorine filter to be able to remove those nitrates and things like that. So it's a real investment for them, and that's where the funding comes from to help make that happen. But I wouldn't have a hesitation in putting cover crops in without financial support from other bodies.
It's a really interesting perspective. Thank you, Andrew. So you've mentioned this groundwater catchment zone, and within the catchment, you've got other neighbours, obviously. Do you engage with other neighbours, any other farmers or any other industries that are in your local community where you can share those catchment issues and look at solving together?
So, excuse me, we're in quite a small catchment. Groundwater catchment zones tend to be very, very small. A river basin catchment, for instance, would be several thousand farms would be involved in that, whereas in our instance, there's actually only three neighbours within that catchment zone. And to be quite honest, that is coordinated by the water company, so they will have a strategy for that area and get us to buy into that. But that being said, we've hosted workshops and other days to talk about particular aspects, and Severn Trent have supported that and got our neighbours to come along. And we have in the past looked at tied up strategies, but it's very difficult to get buy-in depending upon what the weather's doing, different farmers' priorities, because I'm an arable farm in a quite a big dairy area, so a dairy farmer has got other problems to what I'm suffering with.
Thank you. Um, So what advice might you be able to give other farmers in terms of doing the baselining and the measuring? So clearly you opened with, there's been a lot of thought gone into how you've structured your business, what your priorities are, what your outlets are going to be, what your rotation is going to be. There's a lot of planning there. Um, can you give any tips to any farmers that are trying to get to grips with doing, reaching that same level of, business precision, almost, let's call it, operations precision, um, particularly in water, but not exclusively to water. If you've got anything else, any other great advice, how do farmers get on that journey?
Gosh, that's quite a tricky question. So I think when we started, I was in quite a not a unique position, but quite an unusual position in that when we started our farming business, it was because my family member, my uncle, was stepping away from this particular farm and just retiring to the other farm which he owns. So we started with a farm, no machinery, no animals. The world was effectively our oyster. And we had a few pressures to consider. The first was, what way was government subsidy and funding going to take UK farming? The second was, what direction was UK supermarkets going to take UK farming? What are the trends moving forward? And what did we want to do? So, as a farming family, we've grown up with mixed farming. We've done all sorts of things. What would we be happy with doing? So those were our thoughts that were running around in our heads. And then you've got the pressures and the facilities. So on the other hand, you've got what soils have you got? What assets have you got on your farm? Soil is by far the biggest, because whether you've got animals, crops, whatever, they all rely on that soil to grow. So what characteristical properties have we got in the soil? What are we capable of doing? What finances do we have in place? How is it going to work? What loans are available to us? That sort of thing. And who else is around to support us? So we were very fortunate that Severn Trent were setting up their steps scheme for the area at the same time that we were setting up. So it became quite a good union of ideas. So those were the factors that we sort of considered, and quite equally, you can do this if you're thinking of taking a business in a different direction. And then it was a case of, okay, what can we change? Having decided what roughly we want to do, what can we change? What can we improve? How do we go about this? This isn't a 2 year journey, or it's just a case of, right, we've put it all together, now we'll let it run itself. It needs to be a long route. What is our long goals? Where do we want to get to? So my brother and I were quite young. We want to be stewards of the land for quite a long time. Um, so yeah, we essentially, we looked at our soils. We got very, very free draining land, but there was very little organic matter in there. The nutrient levels were appalling. So no matter what we did, we needed to improve both of those. We had quite a huge weed burden. So how do we go about improving those factors? And then personal circumstance as well. We're both young. As millennials, we value our free time more than our parents do. We have slightly less owner pressure, well, not pressure financially, but we put less pressure on our personal finances than our parents would. They'd like to, always be in the black. So it's those life priorities. So we've gone about developing a business where we're developing something for the long-term future and for our children's future, in terms of soil structure and an asset that we can hand down, but at the same time created a system by which we can have more free time as well, so that we are much more positive in ourselves, our mental health, that sort of side. You're muted, Claire.
Yeah, sorry. Classic error. I think that's a really strong message and a really important message to remember, that, I don't think there is any work-life balance when it comes to farming, but trying to ensure that you can prioritize is really critical, and helping to get the business to a place where it can work around your life as opposed to the other way around. But I know that's easier said than done. We shouldn't take that for granted. So I'm going to ask one last question because we've got lots in the chat function. So I want to get to the questions of the audience. So you participated in the Beacons of Excellence project, Andrew. What did you get from that? And what did you feel you were able to share with others in that project as well?
So I think one thing that I've learned over the last 5 years is that it's really important to network and to meet other people, understand different points of view and other solutions to problems. And from the Beacons of Excellence, I've met some fantastic people and learnt an awful lot. Not all of it is applicable to my farm, but I can burrow through the haystack, as it were, and find those needles which are perfect for our business and go about that. I think that we're really looking at improving our organic matter, and we've had very interesting conversations regarding swapping from spreading manures to composting, and making switches to much more nutrient-based systems rather than pesticide-based systems, which all feeds back into this water retention story. But equally, I've learned a lot about different problems in East Anglia. Andrew Francis has given a really good insight into how they are dealing with their irrigation issues, but at the same time, how they're managing to extract the water they need, but without affecting local water levels too much. How all the fantastic projects that he's been involved in, and there's many more case studies right around the country. And it as I say, it gives you useful bits for your own farm, but also a vast knowledge of other things, of other problems right around the country. You're still muted, Claire.
Oh dear. Um, Indicates I should retire, doesn't it? So yeah, really great examples of how getting involved in projects and the benefits that can bring. We've been so delighted that you've participated in Beacons of Excellence, and you've mentioned a couple of the other farmers as well that did. And thanks to everybody that did and participates in all of our projects, indeed. So I think I'm gonna wrap up now, because I don't even know how to use a microphone properly, and I'm gonna pass over to Victoria. Victoria, might you share some questions for Andrew, or maybe there's a couple that I might take as well. But yeah, I'll leave you to field appropriately.
Okay. Um, Andrew, have you tried biochar inclusion to increase moisture retention in the soil?
So biochar is definitely on my radar. I have dabbled in understanding biochar, but I think that it is a step further down my development line, so to speak. So as I mentioned before, I'm just starting to play with composting. I've tried bokashi this time, which has worked really well for us. But proof of the pudding is in the eating, so we'll see um, what that does for our soils and our crops. And I think that biochar will play its part as we go further forward. But given the size and scale of our farm, I can't implement too many changes at once because I won't be able to know what's done what. So it's baby steps for us because I can only do so many trials and experiments per year.
Thank you for that. A question possibly for Andrew or possibly for Claire. Is crop rotation possible if only grapes are grown?
I
I
might.
would have said don't necessarily look at crop rotation, but look at what is growing underneath the vines. So look at what else is there. Effectively, grapes are an orchard, or well, a vineyard, but it's a type of agroforestry in some respects. So think about what is growing, what grass is growing below. Can you introduce other plants that can harvest and recycle other nutrients within the soil to reduce your artificial inputs, things like that, develop soil structure, and then by developing that structure to quite a depth, make it more readily available for make water more readily available for the grapes. That sort of side would be my my thoughts.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I couldn't agree more. And I would also say I visited a not grapes, but a similar system, a soft fruit system recently, and some of the work that we're doing in exactly what Andrew's just outlined there, but also looping it into their IPM strategies as well. So okay, you're limited by what you can do in terms of rotation, but work with what you can do, as Andrew says, rather than what you can't do, and maybe you can enhance your IPM strategies. By introducing some of these solutions as well. So, but a really interesting question. Thank you for asking that.
Next question. Andrew, what sampling did you use and what were the resulting actions?
So what sampling did we use? We did this in two stages. So we did a full soil analysis, which goes beyond the usual NPK in the soils and things like that. So it looked at all trace elements available in the soil sampling, but as well did a full soil texture analysis, showed us where that sat on the soil triangle. And then, as well as that, we did a full carbon analysis of the soils to a depth of 1 meter and collected the results from that, as well as our own tests and observations, such as infiltration tests and things like that. And we pulled all that together, as well as, I should say, digging an inspection hole is really important. Understand what layers of soil that you have there, and we pulled all that together, and we could see what the various problems were in various soils. So, for example, we've got some older grasslands where soil carbon is really high, and that field in particular doesn't have a water retention problem. It grows fantastic crops no matter what kind of year we have. So that just needs maintaining rather than improving. Whereas we have other fields where nutrition is low, so we're giving it extra elements. We've perhaps put it down to grass, and we're using the cattle to cycle nutrients. So we're feeding minerals to the cattle, which is then cycled through the manures, so it breaks down and becomes much more readily available to the soil and then to the plant. So slightly different actions depending upon the field. It's like being a doctor to each field and putting out different prescriptions.
Nice analogy. Next question is, what type of support have you found most valuable? So, for example, did you really need advice of what to do to improve moisture retention in the soil, or is it that you actually really knew what you needed to do but needed funding for your interventions?
Oh, I think it was we needed both really. So my background is in agricultural engineering rather than farming. So I had an understanding of soil systems and soil drainage. But the beautiful thing about farming in the UK in particular at the moment is that it's rather than being led by big conglomerates that want to develop pesticides, it's being led by the farmers themselves. And lots of different people are out there have learned different things by doing experiments. We in fact today we're setting up for an experiment looking at homeopathic remedies to offset the bacterial decay after a glyphosate application. Um, so I think I've learned an awful lot by getting involved in research projects like the Beacons of Excellence project. Um, and I've got that consultation, that knowledge, which I've not necessarily learnt it specifically for my farm. I've not been advised specifically for my farm, but I've seen others and chatted with others, um, and then thought, right, this is what I'm going to try on my farm. So I think networking has been because I found all those people through networking, through getting involved in things, I think that that's been invaluable. But equally, I couldn't have got everywhere without the support that I've had, particularly from Severn Trent, because their approach is much more dynamic to, say, SFI. And there's certainly been items that I've now got in my arsenal which I wouldn't have had or wouldn't have been able to justify if it weren't for their support.
Thank you. Claire, I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
Yes, please.
So Andrew, what do you see as the biggest challenge or indeed opportunity for sustainable farming in the next 5 years? It's a big question here. And how are you preparing your business to adapt to it?
So I think the biggest opportunity for sustainable farming in the coming years is the ability to offset climate risk. I think we can all say that we've experienced some form of extreme in the past 12 months. And I think that by building resilient systems, you might see a drop on your profit margin, but you will gain a consistency in your profit margin. And I think that that will very much be guided and influenced by sustainable farming systems. We've been through a time where we've driven for efficiency. So if we put X, Y, Z in, we know we're going to get W out. But the trouble is that the weather is becoming a bigger and bigger unknown factor in that equation. So we need to control we can't control the weather, but we can start to mitigate the impact of that factor and reduce weather as a risk. So I think that's the biggest part that sustainable farming will play in the coming years.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're going to wrap up today's surgery there. We've learned a lot there and got some great tips. Heard about, learned about a really brilliant, well-planned business. And I think, Andrew, you might agree, a lot of this is attention to detail and getting the detail right and putting that planning in. But yeah, really valuing water as that vital resource. If you're interested, if any of the audience are interested in hearing more about our projects or how they can get involved in projects, please do reach out to us. We'd love to share more details. But otherwise, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Andrew for joining us today. What a pleasure today has been. Thank you to all of the audience for joining us today as well. We know your time is precious and we really value your company and our surgery. So all I need to do now is to wish you all a very happy weekend when it comes, and we'll see you all again at the next Lee surgery.